see a good turnout tonight. We've got a fair number of participants, and been a beautiful day here in my part of the province. So we're always kind of glad when we get a nice spring day to get us revved up for the calving season. So, but we've got a fair number that have come on, and we should try to keep on schedule. So my role here is to introduce and welcome everyone, and so I'll get right at it. Seeing we've got people from the north and the east and the far southwest. So glad we could get a good turnout tonight. And on behalf of BFO board and staff, I'd like to welcome everybody for taking time out of their schedule and their evenings for the webinar tonight that's going to address the federal transport regulatory requirements. So we at BFO have been supporting our auctions and our abattoirs and our farmers and transporters with the animal transport record. And it's got a fair bit of feedback from the countryside. And it was meant to help facilitate the new inspection that's going on at these points of transfer out in the countryside. So we've distributed many of these animal transport records, and we have them on our website. We made them up in triplicate for the ones we've been paper distributing, and they seem to be working as far as what we want done in this atmosphere. So our ATRs are not standalone. They're meant to support what other members of the industry have been doing. Like a lot of the packers have their own manifests that cover the same information, and the auctions are developing theirs as well. Certain ones have. So it's just meant to kind of support that. And they aren't CFIA endorsed, but they seem to meet the requirements that CFIA is looking for. So we just created some of them to get them out into the countryside. The regulatory expectations have been phased in over the last 2 years, and lately with timelines moving forward, as will be explained in the following presentation, we thought the tool was a good tool to share with our producers. So tonight we'll work through the expectations of the regulations with Dr. Heidi of CFIA. So we, with an overview of the animal transport records that will follow. So when she's done her talk, then we'll come up and bring up our record on the screen and talk you through it. And then after that, we'll have a question and answer period. So Dr. Heidi has joined the CFIA back in 2019 and has worked in poultry and the red meat slaughter establishments. She is the supervising veterinarian at one of the beef slaughter establishments in the province. At this time, she is covering operational specialist unit for humane transport, trace and emergency preparedness. So we welcome her experience and her training for tonight's session. We're glad she could join us, and we hope to kind of get through some of the subject matter that many of our producers have been asking about. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Heidi to work through her presentation. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. I'm going to start sharing my screen. If you can just confirm for me that you can see it, that would be great. Jacqueline, can you see it?
Yep.
Yes, yeah, looks good.
Okay. All right, so hello everyone. I'm here today to go through an overview on the amended part 12 of the Health of Animal Regulation. So thank you all for attending tonight. I think we have an hour for this presentation, and at the end, we will get your questions if you have any. So in this presentation, it is intended to go over the CFIA role in animal welfare and why the amendment happened, what is new, overview of the regulation, and where can you find out more. Protecting animal welfare in Canada is a shared responsibility between federal, provincial, and territorial governments and industry. Treating the animals in our care properly is an obligation and it's not an option. CFIA is responsible for humane transportation of live animals into, within, and leaving Canada. In 1977, transportation of animals requirements were introduced in health of animal regulation. A lot has changed since then. For example, changing in technology and infrastructure, research into the effects of transport on animal welfare, international standards, including the Organization of Animal Health, Animal Welfare chapters regarding transport. Trading partners, some markets have more interest in animal welfare than others, but interest is growing in general. Public expectation and demands, growing concerns over how our food is produced and animal welfare, part of the One Health considerations. The social media and the rapid dissemination of info, whether it's right or wrong. There is a set protocol for changing regulation. It involved the extensive consultation with the industry, economic survey of affected people, several drafts. There were put out public comments in the Canada Gazette, Part 1, over 51,000 comments report on Canada Gazette Part 1, including impact study available online. At the end of the day, a lot of variables have to be considered. The feedback on the outdated requirements during the comment period, review of all consultations and feedback to date, review of CFIA transport compliance data, need for special consideration for vulnerable populations, the Organization of Animal Health and international standards, the World Trade Organization, consumer and public expectation, the industry logistics on movement pattern and infrastructure involved over the 40 years under the current legislation. The assessment of feedback regarding ability to adapt and available transport-related technology. The implementation, Part 12 of the Health of Animal Regulation came into force already on February 2020. All of the legislation is enforceable as of February 2020. The food, water, and rest maximum time provisions represents a change to current practices for some industry sectors. So there was 2 years on those max times, but the outcome of that regulation is and will be enforced. CFIA has been working with stakeholders to ensure a clear understanding of requirements and provided transitional advice and information as needed. The interpretive guidance for stakeholders on CFIA website is revised and updated on regular basis. We recognize that some changes are needed in culture, infrastructure, and practices, and that change is hard. So we started out with compliance promotion through education, awareness, graduate enforcement. The regulations has a lot of enforcement tools, including penalties. The CFIA has been working with stakeholders to ensure there is clear understanding and transitional advice. The interpretive guidance for stakeholders on the CFIA website is revised and updated, as we said, on a regular basis, and it's available for you to review. So the Health of Animal Regulation Application Part 12 applies to the transportation of all animals, all species entering or leaving Canada or within Canada. For example, animal exporters can be required to demonstrate compliance with Canadian feed, water, and rest provisions throughout the intended journey when exporting animals out of Canada. Itineraries and schedules may be requested while in Canada to ensure that Canadian regulation can be met in case of animal exports. Once exported animals leave Canada, the importing country has oversight based on their own animal welfare legislation. I am a producer, not a transporter. Does Part 12 Health of Animal Regulation apply to me? Yes, it does, especially in selection of the right animal to ship and communication with transporters. Producers need to make the transport decisions on the farm and not extend the responsibility down the value chain. Human transportation is a shared responsibility. All persons involved in transport of animals share their responsibility under the law. Part 12 of Health of Animal Regulation apply to all those involved directly or indirectly in the transport of live animals, including those who plan the transport, prepare animals for the journey, assemble animals, catch animals, load animals, confine animals in a crate or a conveyance, move animals from a point of origin to their destination, and unload animals from the conveyance or container at their final destination. A new humane transport mindset is to predict, plan, and prevent. Transportation of live animals is a complex process. The Human Transport Regulatory Amendment is focused on positive welfare outcomes through establishing clear, effective producers and record keeping. The goal is to prevent problems whenever possible by identifying where things can go wrong and by taking measures to prevent those situations from happening. When things do go wrong, to look at why and go back to the program and modify it so it doesn't happen again. This is called contingency planning. The code of practice for the care and handling of beef cattle and the verified beef producers program. Farmers demonstrate responsible stewardship of their animals and the environment sustainability, producing high quality, safe, and nutritious food for consumers. The new regulations have outcome-based and prescriptive provisions and are more focused on the outcome-based, which is performance approach, meaning what has to be achieved versus exactly how to achieve it. This gives some flexibility to the people who know the animals. There are still some very clear provisions on how to achieve this. Sometimes the requirements tells you how the picture must look like at the end. And sometimes it tells you exactly and precisely what elements you need to include, and sometimes both. For example, your ramp has to be built and used to prevent animals from suffering, injury, or death. This is what we call outcome-based approach. It also has to be no more than 25 degrees for cattle, and this is what we call it prescriptive provisions. The regulations cover 6 areas, which we will discuss in details later on. The preventative measures, which include knowledge, assessment, monitoring, contingency planning to vulnerable animals. Vulnerable animals, those animals are the animals who are compromised or cull or lactating or very young animals. How animals must be handled, protecting animals from weather, gases, and road condition, and record keeping and documentation and food, water, and rest. Those are all the requirements that we will come to discuss later on. The amendment brings a culture change focused on prevention and accountability, similar to food safety and on-farm food safety and welfare programs. Contingency planning means that in an emergency, we do what we have practiced, just like the fire drills. This benefits you as a producers. Consumers of your product want you to do the right thing, but also to be able to prove you are doing the right thing. Knowledge and skills is an outcome-based requirement. How to assess that training requirement is fulfilled if or when certificate is not required by regulation. The answer for that will be by demonstrating good stockmanship. Evidence that action have been taken are in line with best practices and records of training that you have been given. This is the desired outcome. Educational resources to help producers and transporters are available. One of the advantages to producers is that the regulations are in line with the NAFAC, which is the National Farm Animal Care Council code, and the Animal Welfare Assurance Cattle Care programs. Transporters, auction markets, and abattoir must make appropriate transportation decisions. Examples of sources for training provided by the transportation industry, Canadian Cattlemen's Association, codes of practice, and etc. They are a good tool to refer to. It includes videos, pictures, decision trees, information cards, posters, and mobile-friendly websites or applications. Am I a commercial carrier? You are a commercial carrier if you are in the business of transporting animals. Carriers who own vehicles and are hired to transport animals, or owner-operators who contract an agent to transport animals. Most beef producers will be persons, not considered commercial carrier, but persons who are transporting animals for financial benefits. A producer transporting their own animals to an assembly yard, a feedlot that transports animals to a sale, a producer delivering animals to slaughter. Health of Animal Regulations, Section 138 states that every person who loads, confines, or transports an animal in or unload an animal from a conveyance or a container shall have the necessary knowledge and skills to conduct those activities in compliance with this part. Commercial carriers transports animal in the course of business must provide training to employees and agent and have contingency plan and records. Is this animal fit for transport? Informational tools for industry use is in line with the Code of Practice, Animal Welfare Assurance Programs. The following conditions were most commonly observed when it comes to fitness of an animal for transportation. Animal that is heavy lactation, emaciation, body condition score is less than 2 out of 5, lameness, whether it's moderate or severe, severe limb injuries and swelling, severe respiratory signs. If you are in business of transporting animal and you have employees or agents, you must ensure that they have received the training. All other transporters are not required to have the training, only the knowledge and skills. Taking available training would be one way of acquiring that, but it also can be done through mentorship. Transport continuum is inclusive of all stages of transportation and can be equally or in some cases more important to consider than the journey duration. Assessing cattle before transit. Health of Animal Regulations, Section 138.31. Every person who loads, confines, or transport an animal in or unload an animal from a conveyance or container, or causes one to be so loaded, confined, transported, or unloaded, shall before loading, confining, transporting, or unloading the animal to assess the animal's capacity to withstand the transport process, to assess the factors that could reasonably be viewed as likely to cause animal injury, suffering, or death during the transport process, and the risks prior to loading, confining, transporting, or unloading the animal. Communication between the owner or the producer and the driver or the transporter is very critical. In a perfect world, we would only transport animals in great shape for a short distance. Transportation is stressful. Weak animals are less able to cope. The welfare of the animals of animal being transported is always paramount. The greatest problems occur when we transport unsuitable animals. What to assess before the transportation? Pre-existing conditions such as hernias, lameness, prolapse. Assess the space requirement, overcrowding, and make sure that the animal is in natural positions. Compatibility between the animals on board. Duration of transport. Consider temperature, weather conditions, delays, especially in snowstorm or hot weather, border crossing, accidents, type of conveyance and equipment. You're looking for the gates, ramp, sharp edges, and bedding. All that should be assessed prior to transportation. Another new requirement is for contingency planning. Pre-planned procedure to be used in the event of unforeseen transport events, such as an accident, inclement weather, or traffic delays. Include instructions about what to do if the animal becomes compromised while en route. Contingency plans should be realistic, practical, and focused on the prevention of animal suffering. Examples of unanticipated events that can occur when transporting an animal to consider when developing your contingency plan include road detour, closure of unexpected construction causing delays. Do you have an alternate routes to avoid long stops in case of accidents, road closure or extended delay, location of an alternate holding area for animals such as assembly centers, auctions, or other slaughter establishments. The planned destination has to be changed. For example, planned shutdown. And therefore, what is the second option? How to keep animals comfortable and ventilated. A planned route to keep the vehicle moving in a shaded areas. To park, access to water for sprinkling animals to keep them cool. In case of accident or rollovers involving animals, alert line, like who to call, how to handle, unload, reload, transfer the animals from one conveyance to another, including instructions for animals that require specific handling and transport conditions. A plan to get the truck and trailer upright and reloaded as soon as possible, provided this doesn't cause further suffering. The goal is to prevent problems from happening whenever possible by identifying where things can go wrong and by taking measures to prevent those situations from happening. How does a producer come up with a contingency plan? As per the Health of Animal Regulation, section 138.21, every commercial carrier and any other person who transport animals in the course of business or for financial benefits shall have a contingency plan that establishes measures that are to be taken in order to comply with the requirements of this part. If there are any unforeseen delays or circumstances that could result in the animal's unnecessary suffering, injury, or death, or the animals becomes compromised or unfit during unloading or loading, confinement, transportation. Any person who is required to have a contingency plan under subsection 1 shall inform their employees who are involved in transportation. How will your plan be assessed by CFIA? Compliance will be evaluated by if the plan was available and implemented, not on its format. To ensure contingency plans are successful, it is important that everyone understand the goal, which is to prevent animal suffering, injury, or death in transportation. The regulated party accurately assess the situation, decides what steps and tasks needs to be executed. The contingency plan are practical and realistic. There is a clear communication plan, including backup numbers if people cannot be reached. The plan is reviewed, up to date, and practiced on a regular basis. For example, what happens if the transporter hits a snowstorm and is unable to move for hours while transporting? This is what the CFIA is going to look for. Do you have a contact and the contingency plan is in place? Did you do any action and measures to prevent? Or you are able to demonstrate you took an action? The CFIA can ask for a demonstration that you know what to do in an emergency. For example, where the contact numbers are in your phone. Do all contacts for contingency plan need to be filled out? This is up to the industry. You can have a pre-filled list that it's just updated frequently. Live animal transport is dynamic. Truckers have to check on the animals. You, as a producer, need to let them know if there are animals at risk who need more frequently checking. For example, an animal with a small hernia at the start of the transportation can be expected to get worse over time due to the sorting process, loading, pumping and shifting weight, and balancing while in motion. That animal has a pre-existing condition that may impact its transport experience. That animal may need more space, may be less compatible with other animals, may need handling with special care and more time to load and unload. This animal may tire easily and need rest frequently versus that of a fit animal. Should possibly be considered for a short journey, may be less able to move away from drafts or sources of heat. That animal will have trouble balancing during sharp inclines or swaying of the conveyance during transport. Because of all of these increased risk factors mentioned above, this animal will need to be monitored more frequently than a fit sound animal. Vulnerable animals. The intent of the regulation is to protect the animals from suffering, injury, or death during the transport continuum. Certain categories of animals are more vulnerable than others, even if they are not assessed as being unfit or compromised. They still require special care to travel without sustaining negative outcome. In the cattle sector, the following categories are considered more vulnerable: the compromised and unfit animals, young cattle not yet able to eat hay or grain exclusively, cull animals, or lactating cows. The unfit and the compromised animals. Part 12, Section 136, now includes a list of conditions that define an animal as unfit or compromised. Part 12, Section 139 and Section 140 tells you what can happen with these animals. If they can be loaded, how they can be loaded, where they can be taken, how long the trip can last. Compromised and unfit for transport, now defined in the law, replaces the existing compromised animal policy. The unfit animal must not be transported except to receive veterinary care on the advice of a veterinarian. Alternate options for cull animals that are unfit for transport may have to be considered, including on-farm slaughter or euthanasia. Compromised animals cannot be legally loaded to be shipped to an assembly centers. Compromised animals can no longer arrive at slaughter facilities without having been isolated for transport and other special provisions taken. Animals that underwent routine livestock surgeries, such as dehorning, despudding, castration, detusking, are considered to be compromised and can be transported only under certain conditions. Culling and transportation decisions are part of farming. However, there are challenges with making these decisions. Farmers need to decide whether to treat an animal and wait for the meat and milk withdrawal times to be completed before making the transport decisions, such as sending the animal direct to a local abattoir, culling it to a livestock auction, or euthanizing on farm due to health and welfare reasons. One of the biggest challenge is timing. When to remove the animal from the herd. Animals are removed when their economic value falls below the goal of the herd. However, poor production and reproduction may be the result of an underlying disease, making timely culling decision is best for the welfare of animals. Waiting too long can result in an animal being unfit for transport and or condemned at slaughterhouses. Fit animals are animals who will arrive at destination in good shape. Compromised animals are animals that must have special transport condition. Unfit animal, no person shall load unless under special provisions, and we will come to that later on. For example, these are the examples for the compromised animals. Lame that doesn't appear painful, risk of other over-engorgement, injured or unhealed wounds. The unfit animals, as what we said, there's no person shall load it unless requested by a veterinarian. You have to assess prior to transport. It's not always easy to tell, but if you are in doubt, you should ask your vet. If in doubt, do not transport. The Humane Transportation webpage will have infographic and pictographic for easy access and printing, such as this one that you have on your screen, for assessing animals prior to transport for capacity, fitness to withstand the transport process. Only suitable animals are fit for standard transportation. Special provisions for compromised cattle. Loaded and transported with care taken to minimize their suffering, so they are isolated, are loaded individually without having to negotiate ramps within the conveyance. They may be subject to additional measures such as pain mitigation as applicable, transported directly to the nearest suitable place to receive care or treatment or to be humanely killed, but not an auction or at assembly yard. Transported for a maximum of 12 hours before provided food, water, and rest. In this picture here, you can see a rectal prolapse that resolves when the animals stand up. The rockstar treatment is don't have to climb the ramps in the truck. They have to have a private seating, meaning isolated. Direct flight to slaughter, no more than 12 hours without food and rest. Compromise in respect of an animal means an animal that is bloated, but has no signs of discomfort, has an acute frostbite, is blind in both eyes, hasn't fully healed after a procedure, including dehorning or detusking or castration, animal that is lame other than in a way that is described in the unfit animals, a period of peak lactation, and any animal who exhibits any other signs of infirmity, illness, injury, or of a condition that indicates that it has a reduced capacity to withstand transport. Compromised animals can be transported to slaughter establishment or place where it can receive care, not allowed to go to auction market or other type of assembly centers, unless compromised en route, and this is the nearest suitable place to receive care or to be humanely killed. Nearest suitable place may not always be the closest on the map. In some cases, it may not be possible for the establishment that is close by to receive the compromised animals. Abattoir, like such as sub-establishment or abattoir is not processing that day, or this species, or an establishment that is not able to process an animal with specific condition, or an animal coming from a farm which is not under contract with the closest establishment. The assessment of transport related risk factors, including the animal's condition and the intended journey, must determine the additional confinement time. Is not likely to lead to any negative outcome. The total time without food, water, and rest, or before being humanely killed, must not exceed 12 hours. Provisions for unfit cattle. An unfit animal can only be transported to a place where it can receive treatment or care, and the veterinarian has recommended it. It is transported directly to this place This place is not a slaughter establishment or an assembly center. An unfit animal must be individually loaded and unloaded and segregated from others during transport. No interior ramp to be negotiated inside the conveyance. Measures have to be taken to prevent unnecessary suffering, injury, or death of animals in the transport process. In other words, an unfit animal can only be transported to go to a vet clinic or hospitals. Unfit in respect of animal means an animal that is non-ambulatory, has a fracture, is lame in one or more limbs to the extent that it exhibits signs of pain or suffering, unhalted movement, or reluctant to walk, is lame to the extent that it cannot walk on all four of its legs. Animal that has a prolapsed uterus or severe rectal or severe vaginal prolapse, exhibits signs of generalized nervous system disorder, has labored breathing, has a severe open wound or severe laceration, is extremely thin, has a hernia that can cause the animal to exhibit signs of pain or suffering, or has an open wound, ulceration, or obvious infection. This animal is in the last 10% of its gestation period or has given birth during the preceding 48 hours, or an animal with gangrenous udder and or an animal that has severe squamous cell carcinoma of the eyes. Additionally, the National Farm Animal Care Council have developed guidelines and decision trees, similar to other industry sectors and best practice animal assessment for fitness to travel information. In benchmarking study, there was a higher proportion of compromised and unfit cattle observed at provincial abattoirs versus auction market and licensed establishment. Shipping a compromised animal to provincial abattoirs is appropriate, may be locally transported with special provisions to be humanely slaughtered. Conditions that were the uppermost area for continued improvement included the heavy lactation, emaciation, lameness, severe limb injuries, swelling, and respiratory signs. Remember that it is an outcome based that is important will be looked at. For example, to prevent memory engorgement, signs of memory engorgement vary among and within species. Generally, animals affected can appear uncomfortable and reluctant to lie down. Memory glands will be firm, too hard, and painful. Memory tissue may be warm or hot to touch. Memory tissue may appear deep pink or red. An animal in peak lactation is listed as one of the compromised conditions. This is due to the increased risk of memory engorgement due to high production. We have further clarified that the animal is considered compromised and should be transported as such. If it is in lactation and it will not be milked or not known if it will be milked to prevent memory engorgement during its transportation. Please note that once it became engorged, the animal will be considered as compromised or unfit for transport, depending on the level of discomfort and suffering. Another kind of vulnerable animals are calves. Calves of 8 days of age or less, or calves over 8 days of age, but too young to be fed exclusively on hay and grain. There's a different provisions for each group. The animals are considered vulnerable and must be assessed and monitored during the transportation in order to prevent nutritional deficit, prevent the animal from becoming dehydrated and from suffering from exhaustion. Preconditioning the calves is the best avenue. Young and unweaned calves that are transported on long journeys are at great risk of experiencing diseases, hypoglycemia, and cold conditions than adult cattle. They lie down more than adult cattle and benefit from the provisions of bedding to facilitate lying and reduce the risk of experiencing cold condition. Ruminants too young to be fed exclusively on hay and grain. The period of time between the beginning of the animal's loading and at the end of the animal's unloading is not longer than 12 hours. Food and safe water and rest has to be provided within 12 hours after the last time animal was provided with food, water, and rest. They can go to an auction market, maximum of 12 hours between loading and unloading, maximum of 12 hours without food, water, and rest. Health of Animal Regulation 143 points out that it is not when they are eating hay and grain, but when they are exclusively feed on hay and grain. So this will depend on how they are managed. There is a range of ages that depend on the breeding, the feeding, and the management of animal. The age can range from as little as 6 weeks old to more than 12 weeks old. Producers and transporters must consider these factors and the animal's conditioning to determine if they are able to digest and use hay and grains as the only source of nutrition. The intent is not to prevent the calves from the second transport event in this range. Rather, it is to assure that young calves have the rest, hydration, and nutrition they need so that they are robust and ready for a second journey. Maximum of 12 hours if one is required. Feed must be appropriate for the age. The third group of provisions under the Health of Animal Regulation Part 12 addresses the acceptable animal handling. Nothing new here. We are talking about good stockmanship. Animal handling and equipment for loading and unloading. Handling of animals is done in a manner that does not lead to harm. The ramps, steps, gangways are designed and used and maintained. Exterior ramp angles not to exceed 25 in the case of bovine animals. Specific prohibition as to use of prods and the handling of animals and handling containers with animals. Health of Animal Regulation, Section 144, 1. No person shall during the loading, confinement, transporting, or unloading of an animal in or from conveyance or container do the following. Use a prod, whip, or any other driving device on the animal in a manner that is likely to cause animal suffering, injury, or death. Apply an electric prod or a device that has a similar effect to an animal unless the animal is a bovine of at least 3 months of age, and the prod or device is not applied to a sensitive area of animal, including the belly, anal, genital, and facial regions of the animal. No person shall drag the animal, handle or lift the animals by its tail, handle the animal in any other way that is likely to cause the animal's suffering, injury, or death. For the equipment part, Section 145.4, it's an outcome-based, and it has also the prescriptive provision. The outcome-based ramp, they can bear the weight to which they are subjected without collapsing, twisting, breaking, or bending. There are side rails of sufficient strength. They have a surface that is designed, constructed, and maintained to prevent the animal from tripping or slipping. The prescriptive provision of that would be the 25-degree in case of cattle. If animal is not likely to suffer, sustain an injury, or die by stepping directly from or onto the ground or other surface, the use of ramp or similar device is not mandatory. Protection of animals during transport. Protection from weather and lack of ventilation. No exposure to toxic things. Space requirement. The animal can maintain the preferred position. Conveyance are suitable for species. Requirements for the conveyance are met, and bedding. Regulated parties take steps to prevent animals from suffering because of the elements. Bedding is required for 2 reasons: to prevent pooling of urine and liquid waste, and for animal comfort and traction. Space requirements. The animal is able to stand with all feet on the floor, with head elevated, space for a full range of head movement when quiet and alert, without any part of its body coming in contact with a deck, roof, or top. Commodity groups, producers, transporters, auction market do not often see the correlation between animal transport fitness and the condemnation. Example, in slaughterhouse during the post-mortem, carcasses can show signs of suffering of animals related to transportation, as what you see in the slide here. Non-compliance when they do not have room or their body parts coming in contact with roof or deck, causing suffering and injuries. As discussed before, the transportation of animals starts from loading to unloading the animals. Overloading and sometimes underloading trailer compartments can both compromise the welfare and in certain circumstances increase the incidence of mortality. We tend to pack them in, but if animals go down, they cannot get back up. Overcrowding is covered under Health of Animal Regulation, section 148.2. It states what considered to be overcrowding. The animal cannot maintain its preferred position or adjust its body position in order to protect itself from injuries or avoid being crushed or trampled. The animal is likely to develop pathological conditions such as hyperthermia or hypothermia or frostbites, or animal is likely to suffer, sustain an injury or die. Loading densities and National Farm Animal Care Center codes can be used as guides. Isolation of incompatible animals. It's also covered under Health of Animal Regulation, section 149. Animals are incompatible if any of the animals are likely to suffer, sustain an injury, or die if they are loaded, confined, transported, or unloaded together. For example, if you put mature, intact males that may fight, animals that have shown a pattern of aggressive behavior previously, animals from different sources or that are otherwise unfamiliar with each other, dams with young from other animals. Required humane transportation documentation. Commercial carriers and those who transport animals in the course of business must keep records to allow information to be shared when needed and gathered in the event of a problem. Transporters need two documents, the animal transport records and the transfer of care record, if going to an assembly or an abattoir. Exception would be the animal transport records are not required for movement of an animal for routine animal husbandry or management between land locations on a property where no transfer or stewardship takes place. Two records that are required, what's in your load and evidence that it was cared for. The transfer of care document, it ensures that there is no gap in responsibility when cattle arrive at assembly centers or slaughter establishment. It is to ensure information about the animal's journey is available and can be shared when needed with everyone involved in humane transportation. Transporters are required to keep these documents for 2 years. Animal transport record, the regulation prescribes the information to be contained in the record. Some examples are on this slide, like the driver's name, the conveyance information, date and time the animal were loaded, and etc. Some of these information is already collected for provincial livestock manifests. There is no need to duplicate information if you have it already, but information must be readily available to an inspector. Records must be kept, as what we said, for 2 years. Transfer of care documents. It's covered under Health of Animal Regulation, section 153.1. When animals are left at any slaughter facility or assembly center, transporter must provide notice that the animals have arrived. It shows who is responsible for the care of animal at all time. It's a chance to document what happened, show that they did the right thing, and took steps to protect the animal's welfare, such as in delays in unloading at slaughter or changes in animal health status. The information needed are 3 pieces of information: the date and time of animal arrival, date and time the animal arrived at the slaughter establishment or assembly center, the condition of the animal on arrival, the date and time when and where the animal was last fed, watered, and rested. There is no special format needed. It can be electronic and can use animal transport record if transporter wishes, transporter to get acknowledgement from the receiver. What do transporters do if no one will sign the transfer of care? It is the transporter's responsibility to make the receiver aware when their rule stops and the receiver's rule starts for the responsibility for care of animals. Transporter cannot make receivers acknowledge the responsibility, but can make a record of the interaction to protect themselves. If transporters do not have any proof that they handed over responsibility for the animals on their load, they could be held responsible if something goes wrong later on. Food, water, and rest is an example of a regulation that has an outcome-based and a prescriptive requirement. The outcome-based part would be feed of an appropriate type of its species, age, and condition to prevent nutritional deficit, safe water to prevent dehydration, rest to prevent exhaustion. The prescriptive part would be the timing. So for compromised animals, the journey should not exceed 12 hours. For all other fed animals, should not exceed 36 hours. For young animals, should not exceed 12 hours. The rest in between should be a minimum of 8 consecutive hours. Both food, water, rest prescriptive intervals and the outcome-based provisions must be met. Again, have to think what's best for the animals and their animal welfare outcome. If in doubt, use the minimum feed, water, and rest that is equal for 12 hours. Section 152.3 of the Health of Animal Regulation, it talks about the rest stop requirement. Everyone shall ensure that the following conditions are met whenever the conveyance is stopped for the purpose of providing feed, safe water, and rest to the animals. The equipment that is used is designed, constructed, and maintained to feed and water the animals. Sufficient space is provided to allow the animal to lie down without lying on top of each other. Floors that are well drained and cleaned. Sufficient straws or other bedding is provided so that the animal is not likely to suffer, sustain an injury, or die. Protection from the environmental condition is provided. Adequate ventilation is provided as well. It is important to make the difference between the confinement time and the period or intervals without access to feed, safe water, and rest. The animal has to be provided with feed, safe water, and rest, or slaughtered within the permitted interval without food, water, and rest. The clock used to start when transport started, but now it starts when the food is removed. The animal has to be provided with feed, water, and rest, or slaughtered within the permitted interval. Maximum intervals without feed, water, and rest. CFIA focused its activities on compliance promotion through education and awareness activities for the past 2 years. It started in February 2020 until February 2022. CFIA will always take into account the animal's well-being for any non-compliance under the Health of Animal Regulation. The focus of the CFIA enforcement activity, such as notice of violation or persecution, is on the outcome-based and prescriptive requirement of the food, water, and rest. The animals must be provided with feed, feed that is to prevent nutritional deficit, safe water to prevent dehydration, rest to prevent from suffering from exhaustion. Transport time confinement, 36 hours for fit animal or 12 hours for vulnerable animals. Level of harm to the animals, the regulated parties' compliance history, and their intent or disregards to the regulations will be taken into consideration during the enforcement activity. The compliance promotion period has already ended on February 2022. When do feed, water, and rest times start? Feed, water, rest interval begins when an animal last had access to all three elements. As soon as one element is not available to the animal, the interval is considered to have started. Example, for a group of cattle, the feed, water, and rest time begins when they last had access to feed, even though they may have continued access to water until time of loading. Section 152.1-4 of Health of Animal Regulation, Part 12, defines prescriptive feed, water, and rest intervals. Section 19 of the Inspection Guidance to Industry provides additional information about this topic. Special rules and guidelines for transport by plane, sea, or in newly equipped vehicles. You can find them in Health of Animal Regulation, Section 139, 140, 148, 150, and 155. We're not going to talk about this now for the sake of the time. Accountability for humane transportation. The outcome of humane transport situations will depend on the actions of all parties involved in the transport continuum: producers, transporters, assembly staff, slaughter establishment staff. What did each party do to protect the welfare of the animals in their care? Harm, history, and intent. Everyone in the transport continuum has impact to predict, plan, prevent. The enforcement outcome will depend on what the party did or did not do to protect the animal welfare, and will have into consideration the contingency plan, intent, harm, and history. Choice, accountability, prevention, solutions. When we know better, we do better. Especially in selection of the right animals to ship and communication with transporters. Producers' role in transport decisions is critical. Make the right decision. Early at the farm, of course, these decisions are economic. There is very little economic disincentive for shipping compromised animals to an auction, but rather ethical disincentive. But welfare matters. Do not defer your problem and responsibility further down the value chain. Earlier culling decisions allow producers to cull cows for market and improve the price received at market and overall welfare of the cow. In summary, key changes to Part 12 of the Health of Animal Regulation is the knowledge and skills are required to transport animals. Training that is needed if you are in business of transporting animals, assessment of the animals before the transport, monitoring en route, contingency plan, accurate transport documentation, compromised and unfit conditions for transport now defined in the regulation, maximum time intervals without access to feed, water, and rest changed for some species, special provisions for handling specific classes of vulnerable animals. It is a benefit to you as a producer. Consumers of your product want you to do the right thing, but also to be able to prove that you're doing the right thing. As of February 2022, all persons involved in the transport of animals must have the knowledge about humane transport and implement it in practice. This includes animal behavior, including normal and abnormal appearance, animal handling, best practices, and conditioning animals in advance of transport. There are now special provisions for handling specific type of vulnerable animal, as we said, for lactating animals. Steps must be taken to prevent mammary engorgement for mammals in transport. For example, transport short distance, dry off before shipping, milking during transit, or on farm or euthanasia. Control and enforcement options that we have in CFIA. Seizure and detention, requiring that an animal be sent to another location in order to proceed to an humane transport inspection to evaluate the compliance to the health of animal regulation. Ordering unfit or compromised cattle to be humanely killed. Ordering removal from Canada. Letter of non-compliance. Notice of violation. Sorry. Minor penalties classification can reach 5,000. The maximum can reach 25,000, or persecution. Under Health of Animal Act number 35(1), no person shall obstruct or hinder or make any false or misleading statement, either orally or in writing, to an inspector or who is performing duties under Health of Animal Regulation. Number 2, the owner or person in charge of a place entered by an inspector or officer, and every person found in the place shall give the inspector all reasonable assistance in the owner's or person's power to enable the inspector or officer to perform duties and functions under the Act. Administrative monetary penalty limitation under Health of Animal Act, Inspection Section 38. No proceeding in respect of violation may commence after later than 6 months in case of minor violation, or 2 years in case of serious or very serious violation. Where can you find out more? If you go to the CFIA Humane Transport and Animal Welfare website, you can see all the information about the amended part 12 of the Health of Animal Regulation, the livestock transport brochures, the interpretive guidance, and much more. Here is an example of the educational material that you can find on the website. Now, I'm done with the presentation. We can open the floor for questions. Let me just stop sharing.
Yeah, Dr. Heidi, we'll just do a quick little interlude here. I'll just say that's a lot of material that you got through. We really appreciate you working through all those subjects, and I'd encourage our participants to come up with some questions while we just quickly run through our document that we do use, Dr. Heidi. So Jacqueline was going to bring it up on screen, but that'll allow them to get some questions ready for us.
Jacqueline, you can go ahead with that one.
Yeah, so this is a form we have both on our website, as well as one that we've tried to distribute across the province to different places. And as we're at trade shows, now that COVID's relaxing a bit, we'll bring them with us. So if you meet us up at the Lindsay show or at shows in Western Ontario, we'll try to bring these along. But basically, it just goes down pretty quickly. I won't take long on this. Data shipment, those things at the top are pretty obvious. We do want a premise ID if available. So that's usually what the guy that's selling the cattle would put up there. Then you would fill in the name of your transporter. It might be one and the same as the producer, but if you have somebody come in to pick up those cattle, that's the idea. We're transferring care. So then you'd put in the name and address of that person and his company and which driver he has on that day. They might have multiple drivers. Then the license of the trailer, square footage, whether it's meter or feet, just the measurement to give the inspectors to figure out the density of the stock that's in the table in the trailer. Last cleaned out is another subject that was mentioned earlier that they're looking for. So there's facilities on your routes to do that. Then you go down through, describe what your load is, the weight of the load, the types of animals, whether it's a couple black cows or some stocker calves or what it is. You just try to define them. It doesn't on this form require your CCIA tag numbers. Fit for transport. Obviously, when you're loading them, you're going to check them over for that. That's the whole point of this form. And the next field there, number of compromised animals would be like Dr. Heidi mentioned, if you're just doing a short haul under 12 hours to get them direct to an abattoir because of something that put them into that compromised cattle category. So, and the feed, water, and rest, as she mentioned, is key there for that time of travel. So you can identify that. Then as you go down to, you'll get to the bottom at the arrival of the destination. So you're just going to put, where they are, what time you did unload them, so they can do the math on that. The receiving company, which would be either an auction market or an abattoir in most cases, or a collection yard, and their address, and then the check that those cattle did get offloaded in good condition. And she did mention about, those signatures. You've got the first, where the cattle came from is your owner's signature. Then the trucker, the transporter, method of conveyance is doing the middle signature. And in most cases, you can get a signature from that receiver. But if not, like she said, you've got to keep track of that and make a record and at least notify them that the cattle were brought. So we do have them in 3 different copies. The color isn't really necessary to pay a lot of attention. It just helps you when you're peeling them off as you go down. And in some cases, it's a transporter that has it. In other cases, it will be the producer that has it. So now I'll turn it over for questions to come in. Jacqueline's going to moderate the questions, but appreciate everybody sticking with us and getting to this point of the evening. So I'll turn it over to Jacqueline.